My name is Pat Fiore. I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. That's a mouthful. I've been with the agency about 5 years. Prior to that, I was with the CHP. I was a commercial officer, commercial sergeant, did all the stuff over there. I did that for about 29 years. So now I'm with the federal side. I enjoy it. A little bit different job. I don't carry a gun anymore. Carry a badge, but it's a little bit different. Today I have with me Bill Poole. He'll talk to me a little bit. He's going to talk about LEDs a little bit, because you guys are probably interested in that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about why are we doing more inspections with you folks, and what does that inspection entail. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Go real basic into what we look at, and if you guys have general questions, that someone was talking about the 45-day inspection and how does that equate to our annual inspection, that type of thing. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Once I get through those two parts of it, then Bill's going to talk about ELD. And if you guys are interested in ELD, then he's going to talk about that as long as you guys want to talk about it. And if you get done with that real quick, then we'll actually get into talking about what we look for as far as inspection. But there's really not a lot of difference between what we look for and what the CHP looks for, obviously, since it comes from the same group. So this is an interactive thing, so if questions come up, raise your hand, let's just deal with them, because I don't know how much time we're going to have. So let's use the time that's available to us. If you have a question, let's take it right then and there, and hopefully it'll answer the question. I understand most of you are mechanics. You guys are working on the vessels on a regular basis, so that's a good thing, okay? So this is you. I didn't bring my controller. I was doing this on the way. I didn't bring it. So what we're going to talk about is what we call the 3-year. The CHP used to have that program called the biennial inspection that they did every 2 years. Well, the DOT has got one that I call it the triennial, which is every 3 years. And we are going to go see bus companies every 3 years if you're subject to the DOT regulations. That is a new thing. I'll talk a little bit about where that came from. But we will be coming and we will be visiting bus companies at least every 3 years. Maybe more often, depending on circumstances. We'll talk about how that comes up and when that comes into play. We're going to talk about compliance investigations when we come out. Since you guys are the maintenance side, we're going to talk about what do we look for and how does that really affect you. A lot of it is the paperwork. OSHA says a lot of times that if it didn't get written down, it didn't happen. And that's a true statement. I've looked at some bus companies. They've got a beautiful fleet. They don't have any problems roadside, but they don't have any documentation. Well, that's going to make you unsatisfied. I mean, you've got a great fleet, you've got a great program, but obviously, if it doesn't get written down, there's no way to prove it. And also for purposes of liability. I mean, that's huge, right? That's huge. Now, I am a realist, and maybe I'm not talking to the right people here, but a lot of times I'll come in. I just visited a carrier, a bus carrier. Unfortunately, they're unsatisfactory. They don't know it yet because I'm going to go in and see them and tell them that. But the point is that their problem was the CHP saw them, and then after the CHP saw them, they didn't think anybody else was going to come, so they didn't do anything. So when I told them I'm going to be there next week, there's not enough time to put everything together. So no 45-day inspections, they didn't have anything. Were they doing them? No. I mean, the buses didn't look too bad. But there's no way they can doctor them. And I'll tell you one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to doctor documentation. Because when we look at stuff, we generally have a rule that says we're going to look at it, and if there's a problem, we're looking at a 10% problem, generally speaking. Okay? So if you're missing 10% or there's 10% of problem, we're not going to get excited until it's 10% or more. Okay? You falsify one document, that just automatically makes it a bad deal. Okay? That's a one-time deal, it makes it a bad deal. So you did all your inspections right, you got a fleet of 50 buses, and you messed up one inspection. Oh, there's a suspension, let's doctor this, right? And then I'm going through the inspection, and I look and I say, well, how could that guy have done that inspection when this is on the East Coast, right? That one inspection is going to make that unsat, right? That's an unsat violation. It's called an acute violation for us. One is bad. Everything else is usually like a 10% or more. Okay, so don't mess things up by doctoring things up. That could really, really be bad. A lot of times I tell people it is what it is. We might not even ask for that one, right? So if we do, we do, and we don't, we don't, right? So anyway, that's compliance investigations. Then Bill's going to talk a little bit about LEDs. That's a big buzz thing right now. Everyone's all excited about it. We still don't know what's going to happen. We're talking about it and getting all this direction, but we'll see. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about roadside inspection if we actually get there and what we actually look for and some of the things that we look at on the bus and stuff like that. I'm not supposed to say. All right, the triennial inspection, triennial, okay? I don't know if you've ever heard of MAP 21. It's a big thing in our agency. It was a congressional a bill that passed. It kind of mandates us. It's usually associated with funds. This happened back in 2012, and it kind of gave us a lot of directions towards motor coaches. You guys that have been in the industry a while know that there have been some pretty serious crashes. And unfortunately, when those happen, then a lot of attention is drawn towards the industry. You know, one thing I really do like about the motor coach industry is how you guys kind of stick together. When there's a problem, you guys go out and rescue each other. You don't, put the screws to someone because they're hurt, or they're down. You're going to help them out because it affects the whole industry, right? You as a whole. And you guys don't want the bad guys out there any worse than we want the bad guys out there, right? I mean, so it's kind of neat to see that the industry kind of works together with that. Trucking, not so much. It's a little bit different animal, but busing is really like this, kind of almost like a family. And we all have families, right? You got those people you don't want to talk about too much, and then the ones that. But it's kind of like that. But I kind of like how they kind of work together on that. So again, we've had that kind of that black eye in California. I'm part of the California division, but California had a couple of those crashes, right? And unfortunately, we had to change the way we were doing things as an agency because it looks pretty bad if we go in and we visit somebody and then short time later they have a bad crash and we go in again because of the crash and then we make them unsack, right? That doesn't look too good. So we really revamped everything and how we do things. And Congress kind of gave us the push on how we were going to do that. So we did change a few things. This talks about when we're going to look at carriers. There was carriers, I know that some of you guys have actually visited, have not been visiting a long, long time, right? Because you didn't have any problems. And our agency was kind of focusing on bus companies that had problems, right? And we were kind of directing our resources towards that. Now, with the new congressional mandate, everybody's got to have a safety rating. And it's got to be within 3 years. Okay, so the rule of thumb now is going to be we're going to visit every bus company at least every 3 years. Probably sooner. What's going to make it sooner? If you start getting alerts and something, especially for a bus company. If a bus company gets an alert, that's really not a good thing because bus companies don't get inspected too often, right? So if you start getting an alert for some reason, that's not a good thing. Because the few times you are getting inspected, it means you're having problems, okay? That's generally what it means. The other thing that happens, and some of you maybe have been the recipient of that, is that an unfortunate incident happens, right? An accident or some other type of incident that has a lot of focus. We may come in response to that. Okay, so and if we do that, then it kind of starts the clock over again. So if we were just there last year and we come in because of an accident, then the whole clock starts over and then your 3 years starts over. Okay? So everybody here, if you're running interstate and you're running the motor coaches, you should have a safety rating, and we should have been in there within the last 3 years. Now, I'm not expecting anyone here to raise their hand and say, no, well, you haven't got us yet. But if we don't have you, you might want to check your authority, and you might want to check to see what kind of buses you have registered with us and stuff, because you don't want us to find that side either. Because I've talked to several carriers. South San Francisco has a lot of motor coach companies, right? So we go in and we go to the areas where a lot of the buses hang out, and we see some companies there, and I'll go to a guy and go, hey, you go to the airport? Oh, well, yeah. You don't have a DOT number on. Are we coming to see you? Oh, no, well, you better get in there and get this stuff registered, get things ready, because we're going to come in. And if you don't do it, I've got your information. Now I'm going to come in a little bit later. So as a rule of thumb, anybody that's here, if we haven't seen you in the last 3 years, you might want to check and see what's going on. Now, there are some rules that talk about authority, right? You could still operate and go to the airport and not have authority because you're running it under a commercial zone, right? Not too common, but it does happen. But if you're going to the airport, for the most part, we should be seeing you. And you're definitely under the DOT regulations, even if you don't have to have authority. Okay? So we can talk about that on the side if anyone's interested in that. And again, if anything comes up, raise your hand, because I like to talk, and I'm going to steal all Bill's thunder if you guys let me. Again, it talks about if you're a new company coming in, we're going to look at you within 2 years. That wasn't really the case. They're going to have safety audits. I want to just kind of go through this. I don't want to take too much time on this because I know you guys are mechanics. This is kind of boring stuff. Again, we're going to look at you guys every 3 years. The main buses that we're going to look at are over-the-road buses, which are really the ones that have cargo. That have the luggage space underneath. You know, those are the ones we're really going to look at. When does it begin? When there's some interstate activity. Safety audit's not a big deal.
I have a 12 buses lead. How many buses do you look at?
We'll get to that. We're going to get to that. We're going to, we do have, you talk about physically actually looking at. Yeah, I'll show you that in a minute. We got a slide coming up on that. There we go, that question. I probably should repeat it. The question is, how many buses are we going to look at? And you know, the number I'm going to show you is going to be the general, it's our general rule. Now, if we look at some buses and, you know, like, I'll give you an example. And I'm a realist, I understand that. You guys are going to really, people really want us to look at their good buses, right? I mean, I'm a realist, right? So let's say that we're going to look at 5, and I look at 4, and then, oh, this other one's right over here, and it's all pretty, and it's all, you know, brand newly washed and everything, you know. And then here comes this one coming off the road, you know, it's like, I want to look at that one, right? So I look at that one, and that one's bad, right? Let's say there's something wrong with it. Well, I might expand beyond the 5 at that point. I said, no, I want to look at another one of your other buses, not the ones that you're going to give me, right? And let's be realistic. I mean, you know, you guys want to look at you and show your best foot forward, right? But our job is to really kind of look and see how you guys look, right? So, and we constantly talk about that. We know that. I mean, we look at buses, we get underneath there, and there's brand new grease on there. I mean, it's still, you know, it's still, what's the color, purple or whatever. You know what I mean? So we know that you guys just looked at that much, right? So that's okay. We'll look at it because sometimes we still find things wrong. But the ideal inspection is the one that comes off the road, right? The one that really just came off the road. Now, if you looked at that bus before without that day, that's great. Whatever. But generally speaking, we're going to give you what those general numbers are. Okay, compliance investigation. So when we look, we come in, some of this stuff's not going to affect you guys, but one of the things we're looking at is driver's license. That's a really big thing. CARE is what we use. It's called, it's our general acronym that any investigation we're going to do, we're going to look at these 4 things. CARE is commercial license, authority, insurance, and then red flag drivers. Okay? So we're going to look at that for everybody. I'm not going to get a lot into that, but that's what we're going to do. Another thing we really should talk about and make sure that we understand is that I understand that a lot of mechanics are drivers. You go out to test runs and you drive the bus out there. That's in Congress. Okay? There are no exceptions to that. You have to be in the drug and alcohol program. You guys have to have CDL. You have to have the endorsements, okay? So just be aware of that if you see that every once in a while, because that's going to, if you're using a driver and we find that out during the course of the investigation, and it doesn't matter if people say, well, they're taking it around the block, that's not an interstate move. The DOT regulates drivers both for CBL and for drug and alcohol, both inter and intrastate, right? It's actually our program. The CHP actually applies our program to you, so we do that as well. So if you have mechanics that are currently not properly licensed and they're going on the road, and you want to take them on the road, right? I mean, so they can, you know, look at the bus, whatever. Make sure that they're properly licensed in the drug and alcohol program, okay? Because that could really, just one little small thing like that could cause a lot of problems for you and your company. Even though you're doing everything else right, that small little thing can cause a problem, okay? So if it's not something that's currently being done, or if you've got one of your mechanics that are not done in the proper way, get that done. Do that as soon as you can, because we don't want to have any of those type of problems come up in the future.
Hey, Patrick.
Yes, sir.
The San Francisco Airport Authority, buses are being inspected by the airport. You guys have authority, though, right?
Yes.
But their grounding vehicles, those are their inspections. Have you heard about this?
No, they're grounding vehicles? Is that what you're saying, they're grounding vehicles?
The airports are being inspected by SFO.
So, you're talking about, does our authority preempt them?
Yeah.
No, because they have the authority, I mean, they can tell you can't go to the airport, right? So, I mean, basically you get those local jurisdictions, they have a lot of power. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, and, you know, because if, a lot of times when we're looking at interstate authority, you might not have to have interstate authority because you're in the commercial zone, right? Now, you're still subject to the DOT regulations, right? And you still have to comply with the regulations. Now, you may get into some stuff that's way beyond me, like inhibiting interstate commerce and all that, that's way beyond my pay grade. You know, if that's what you're implying, that is absolutely beyond my pay grade. What I'm saying is I know that they do that. A lot of our regulations say that, you know, or imply that you have to comply with local authority. And it's actually an interstate violation not to comply with local authority. Like, for example, CHP rules, we're going to talk about in a minute, a 45-day inspection. That's a local rule, but we absolutely enforce that rule because that's a local rule. Now, if I was in Nevada, they don't have that, so they have to prove that they have a systematic inspection program, right? Here, it's mandated by law, so it's a little easier for us. All right. So we're going to also talk about, you know, we do interviews. Some people get a little tweaked out when we start talking to mechanics. We'll go actually talk about, hey, what'd you do? And, you know, talk to you about how do you do an annual inspection, stuff like that, okay? We might call drivers, okay? That is part of what we do. Sometimes owners get a little excited when we do that, but that's what we do, right? We want to find out what's right, what's wrong, if things are broken, we want to fix them. That's our job. So understand that. Discussions, we have discussions with the drivers informally, and then sometimes we'll do interviews. The enhanced techniques, that all kind of stem from those big bus crashes that were happening. Okay, CDL, we're just going to go over this real quick. These are the things we look at. CDL, authority, insurance, and red flag violations. Red flag are drivers that are put out of service for driver's license issues, and we're going to always follow up on those. Okay? When we do our comprehensive, these are all the parts we're going to look at. You might have Bill Poole come in 1 year, and then 3 years later you come in, and I come in. I might do a different inspection than Bill. The general inspection is going to be the same, but depending on the expertise of the inspector, you may get looked at some different things. I mean, your job is to comply with all of CFR 49. You know, and Bill might look at certain things, and I might look at certain things. You know, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. But we're all kind of looking for the same thing, but it just depends on who's looking at you or whatever. But again, we try to keep it general. You guys that have, when I come and visit some of you guys, you know me, I'm pretty anal, right? And I look at a lot of stuff, and I make sure that when I leave, you're pretty much doing everything you're supposed to be doing. Some other guys might not look at every little detail. It's just the nature, okay? So what do we look at for compliance for 396, which is maintenance? This is what we were talking about here. So we're going to talk about maintenance files, what's required to be there. If you look at our regulations versus the CHP regulations, man, ours makes these general statements, you know, and they're not very big about what you have to do. Where the CHP, they're like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, right? Okay. So essentially, we see something generically, and then you got to do it all. But CHP might specifically say that you have to do a lot more detail. We're going to talk about the maintenance program, because that's one of the things we look at. What is your maintenance program? How do you keep your vehicles in good condition? Talk about the inspections. There's basically 3 different types of inspections we're going to look at. And then last but not least, the DDIRs, which seems to be a lot of problems. We get a lot of problems with DDIRs. Okay, so what do you have to have in your maintenance file? Okay, unless you're really good, and we've been in there several times, we always find some type of violation of this. The maintenance file has to have the company's name, you know, the number, whatever, fleet, you know, fleet number 1, truck number 1, bus number 7, whatever. You've got to have that on it. You've got to have the make on it. You've got to have the serial number, which usually is the VIN number. You've got to have the year and the tire size. That's the one that usually gets deleted the most or forgotten in the document somewhere. The tire size of the that's used on that particular unit. Okay. Or tire sizes if there's multiple sizes. Okay, this became a really big issue because they were using tires that were the wrong size and they overheated, and there were crashes that resulted from that. So now they require that to be on the maintenance file. What I would generally do is if you use a manila envelope or some type of other information, put that information right on the front, and then you're done. If you don't put it in there, it's somewhere in the maintenance file, well then it might get missed, and you know, just put it in the front. It's just a lot easier. And then the last thing is, if you're leasing a vehicle or the vehicle does not belong to that particular company, where did it come from? That needs to be in the file as well. Did you lease it from ABC Bus Company, or did you borrow it, whatever. So that information has to be in. So again, pretty common violation, not a serious violation, but again, if you just put a sticker on all all your maintenance files, it has that information, then you're done and don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay. All right, maintenance, okay, the maintenance itself. So, you got to be able to tell us the nature and the due dates for your maintenance program. That's a real common violation. I got to be able to look at your maintenance file and say, okay, I can tell you to do your A maintenance, B maintenance, C maintenance, whatever it is. And you can call it whatever you want. But I got to be able to look at it and see what your maintenance program is. And then what I'm going to do is look to see if you're doing it, right? That's the whole purpose of why it's there. Because when things get busy, sometimes we don't do what we're supposed to do and whatever. Now, for example, I'll just use this for my personal car. If I have a car, I got this from my days back in the CHP. CHP did their oil changes every 5,000 miles. And some of you guys that I've worked with have already heard this, but they did it every 5,000 miles. And we had a 500-mile window on either side of that. And if your vehicle did not get its inspection within that 500, or actually 1,000-mile window, you got in trouble, right? It's the same thing. We want you to put an interval on there that's reasonable, that's actually what you want to do. And what I say is, let's say you guys are going to change the oil on a bus every 12,000 miles, let's say. What I say next is, okay, you want to do 12,000, but what is your drop dead? What is it, the one that you are not going to go over? Well, we don't go over 15, let's say, okay? Well, then 15 is the number we're looking at. I don't want 20 in there, because, if I got 20, I'll never be right. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something reasonable, right? 12 is what we're shooting for, but we are not going over 15. So if you go over 15, let's say you do 16, then I'm going to say, and it's not a serious violation, but I'm going to say, okay, be careful here, right? You went 16 here. You kind of see what we're talking about? That's what we're looking at when we're looking at the maintenance. Are you doing what you're supposed to? Now, what is it basically? It says you got to be systematic and you have to have a regular program. But that's how we look at it to see if you're systematic. Is there some intervals set up and are you meeting your intervals is what we're looking at, okay? Like a plan, absolutely, like a plan. And again, if you're doing it and you miss that thing by 100 miles or whatever, we're not going to get all excited about it, but we're going to say, hey, look, you didn't do it. It'll be a minor violation. It's not a serious violation. Go ahead.
How do you know which right or wrong? Because if you do different fleets, but have one guy...
You determine your fleet. You determine. It's your fleet. You tell me.
I get that. If you go to somebody else and say, hey, Joe, put his at 12 and you're doing yours at 25, is that set up a red flag for you?
I'm not that good, so I'm going to let you tell me, right? But, I talk to the guys, and I'll talk to the mechanics, and I'll talk to what's going on, and I'll sit there and say, really, and I'll sit there and say, what's your drop dead? What is it you don't want to do? And they'll tell me, right? And that's what we're looking for. And yours might be different than someone else. Now, some of that's done by the manufacturers, right? Sometimes the manufacturer says, this is what we're going to do, and this is, and you're subject to that because, that's what you're going with. So, we're not so good that I'm going to sit there and say, I know that this is a GMC and it's got to be done this. No. I want you to tell me, and if you want to run it longer, that's up to you. What we're really looking for is, are you doing a systematic program, and you determine what that program is, as long as it's reasonable.
Just a clarification, you say with your drop dead, you say your inspection is 12,000 miles. And that's what you tell them to expect, that that's what it is. Should that be your drop dead?
Yeah, again, what a drop dead is like, I could go to someone seriously and talk to them and say, what are you going to be ticked off about if it gets this low? Because like I said, the CHP had that every 5,000 miles, and they got ticked off if it went over 500 on either side of it. That's what we got trouble for, right? So that was their thing. And if you sit there and say yours is 12 and you do not, that's what you're going to do as a company, that's what you're going to do as a company. And that's your number.
How did they tell you guys that my inspection is 12? Really, it's 15. Document that as part of your maintenance plan.
Again, what I would do is, if I'm looking at the file, whatever your drop dead is, it should say what it is. If you say, well, we're shooting for 12, then 12 is not your drop dead. I want to know what it is that you are not going to be happy with. If it's 15, it's 15. That really should be your interval, okay? That should be the one listed in file, because you're not going to go over that. You will not go over that. And if you do something happened that was wrong. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's not right? Something that didn't, it happens one time out of 100 or whatever. Okay, so what happened here? Well, I was out on a trip and whatever, you know what I mean? So,
That's not a safety issue.
it's not a safety issue, it's a maintenance, the regulation says you have to have a systematic maintenance program. So what we're looking for is if you didn't make it, you're not having a systematic program, that's what we're talking about. Now again, we're gonna talk about serious violations that we're talking about this is, we don't really have problems with regular maintenance for people that take care of their equipment. And every once in a while, so we'll put a note down or whatever, but it's not a big deal. And we'll talk about when the law requires certain things, like we'll talk about inspections a little bit later, that's a little bit different, right? That's because the law says 45 days, it's 45 days, right? So some states don't have that. And it's the same thing, it would be the exact same thing for inspections in other states. They don't have a 45 days, so what do you have? What is your inspection handbook, right? So again, this is your program, and basically, you're going to tell us what your program is, and we're going to look at it to see if you're doing it. That's really all this is, okay?
Stay true.
What's that?
Just stay true.
Trying to stay true, and we want to be reasonable with it, right? Right? So, okay, and then, again, inspections, we have to keep all records of inspections, repairs, and maintenance, and the date and nature. Sometimes we get a little bit of a problem, I don't know if it happens so much with buses, it happens a lot with trucks, especially if they're older operators, whatever. They work on their vehicles and then they don't document it. You know, and you look at it, they're doing pretty good, they're not having a lot of problems roadside, but there's no documentation that they did anything, right? Again, you can't tell me that you didn't change the tires. This thing's been running for 3 years and you never, actually, let's say, you never replaced the tires in a whole year. Well, yeah, we did it like twice, 3 times, whatever, right? Well, you gotta document that, right? We gotta see that it's being done, right? So make sure we have the actual nature of what's being done, and it's just.
Record keeping, how many years before you get this going?
It's 1 year for us. There's some exceptions to that, but it's generally a year. When we're talking about the annual inspection, it's going to be 13 months, right? So, but generally it's a year. Yeah. Unless you get rid of, if you get rid of a unit, right? If you get rid of a unit, it's no longer under your control anymore than 6 months for that one. If you leased it for a while and then you got rid of it, you keep it for 6 months. Okay, but generally it's a year.
That's 1 year hard copies, right?
Yeah, 1 year. 1 year is what we're looking for. So you can keep hard copies. You can do electronically as long as they're backed up. Okay, so we had a discussion about files and, well, can I show you that I did an inspection, right? There's an inspection, was there a document generated with that inspection, right? So, and who was the inspector? If you just said, I've got proof here that I did the 45 days inspection, but it doesn't have who the inspector was, that's, times, well, not necessarily times, but definitely at least date and who did the inspection, then how do we know it really happened? Then we're doing the pencil work thing, right? So, or we could be theoretically doing the pencil work thing.
One of the things we talked about, and I don't think it ever got resolved, is electronic and hard copy. We have a hard copy of the, say the 45 days,
Right.
That's a hard copy. We back it up with an electronic repair order, but you have the repair order, but you actually don't have the signature in the 45-day inspection.
Right.
So we had talked about how long you need to keep the hard copies of the 45-day inspection.
Yeah, did everyone understand what he's asking? So what happened was when we were there, we were looking, and he could show me that the inspections were being done electronically, but there was no proof that who actually did the inspection, like the actual inspection itself would tell me who the inspector was, what items you looked at, were there deficiencies, and stuff like that. So for us, our inspection retention is a year, okay? If you want to do it physically or electronically, that's up to you. If you're going to do it electronically, you have to have a backup. Because you can't come in and say, hey, the computer just went down yesterday. Because trust me, that would happen sometimes if it could. So we want to make sure that it's backed up, okay? But our retention is a year, okay? And Bill, if you have anything. Okay, and then emergency exits, that's one that seems to get neglected a lot, is the emergency exit, the 90-day inspection. That's right. Right, you guys were using the C3 108, a lot of people use the C3 108 form to document their inspections, their 45-day inspections. On there, it doesn't specifically talk about emergency exit. It talks about windows, but it doesn't talk about emergency exits. So when we're looking through that C3 108, which is a really good document, I really like that, you might want to take one of those little columns that says hydraulics, hydraulic brakes or whatever, cross that out and just put emergency exits. and then some stripping, okay? But that one kind of gets neglected sometimes, and we want those looked at every 90 days. You know, we can kind of tell too if they're being done every 90 days. How can we tell? You go in there and they're trying to jam that, they can't open it, and it's like, when was the last time that was open? Oh, we just did it, you know, like the inspection system was just done like a week ago. And you gotta be careful too, because if those things stick, and if they stick too much, I might ding you for a bad exit, right? Because if you can sit there with a big huge guy and he gets it open, mama and the little kid ain't gonna be able to do that, right? We want those exits to be able to open freely, right? And be good. So
Do not grease them.
do not grease them. Okay.
And what our guys did, we go through and we said, well, a little bit difficult, so I'll grease them all up. And it just worked like glue when it cooked it.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah, it's all good. Good to know. Do they? Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, again, this is what we were asked a little bit ago. So it's 1 year for our maintenance records, right? And then 6 months for a vehicle that's no longer under your control. Systematic, we talked about this, inspection, repair, parts, and accessories of a safe and proper. You know, this is a real generic section, but it's exactly everything we've been talking about so far, right? Everything that we're talking about, Ben. This is where the whole thing comes about, your systematic and keeping your intervals and that type of thing. Okay, inspections. So we're really kind of focusing on 3 type of inspections here in California that we're going to kind of look at. The annual inspection is the big one. You know, there's a lot of violations you can get from the DOT, and we call them paperwork violations, right? And the fines are a lot anyway, no matter how you look at it. The fines are kind of nominal, but when you don't do an annual inspection, that's not a paperwork violation, that's a serious violation, and that can get into the thousands of dollars, okay? So this is pretty important that we make sure that we comply with the annual inspection. Ruling a couple years ago came down and says we're no longer going to allow roadside inspections to count as an annual inspection. Some of you guys probably remember that those used to count. If you got a clean roadside, that counted as your annual inspection, and you could use that in tickets to the other states. Okay? It's no longer good anymore.
A CVSA standardized level 1 inspection visit.
That's right. So, and something that you guys might want to think about, because when I read that rule when it came out, the whole logic behind why they don't allow it to count anymore is because they said that the roadside inspection was not thorough enough. Okay, now, I want you guys to think about this, because I don't know if they're going to go somewhere with this later, but this is their logic. They're saying that annual inspection, because it's only, think about it, for us, for the DOT, it's only done once a year, right? So that inspection is a pretty important inspection for us, and they want you to be very comprehensive, right? It's not just a superficial inspection, it is a comprehensive. And one of the things they said in the preamble into this rule was that the roadside inspector is not going to take the wheels off. They're not going to take covers off. They're not going to inspect all these components. Well, let me ask you guys, and now don't raise your hand, but when you guys are doing your 45s, are you doing that? Because I don't think most people are. Because I know a lot of people that are ex-CHP that they do those 45-day inspections and stuff. So it's just something to think about that I don't know if the DOT is going to go to that in the future, or if they're going to reevaluate some of these state programs that they allow, but I think that when we do roadside inspection, we do a pretty thorough job, right? And they're saying that that's not thorough enough, implying that we can't take the wheels off, right? We're not going to do that, and they're implying that that should be done. It was implied in this rule. I'm not saying, I'm just telling you what the rule said, and I'm not going to go in and say, did you take the wheels off? But I'm just telling you that's kind of the thought process behind that. So for you guys have a 45-day inspection, and I don't know if the CHP requires you to take those wheels off or whatever. But maybe one thing you want to think about is maybe once a year, kind of really do a really, really good one and call it an annual, right? Make it an annual and have it. Just so that, yeah, we took the parts off, we did this or that. And I'm not going to tell you one way or the other, because we've allowed those other inspections, and I know realistically how some of those inspections are done. But if you read the preamble to that rule that said we can no longer use the roadsides, that's what they were talking about. It's kind of an interesting thought. Yes?
Yes, the water vehicles are SPAP certified by CHP every 13 months. Would that apply as our annual
Okay, so that's a really good question. His question is, does the SPAD inspection, or we can even go further and say the annual CHP inspection too, that come, you know, every terminal has to be looked at every 13 months. I'm going to say, I'm going to talk on both sides of my mouth here, because I'm a Fed, right? But if we follow the logic of that rule I just talked about, and the saying that they're not going to allow the inspectors to do it, they're saying no. Okay, they're saying no. But on the flip side of that, we do recognize the CHP programs as equivalent to our annual. Now, I've never got any real direction as to whether that means the inspection you guys are doing, or whether that's an inspection program mandated by the state inspectors themselves. But following the logic of the roadside, I would say no, because of the roadside inspection and the inspectors. Because a CHP is not going to do much more of an inspection than a roadside one, other than maybe they'll check the, they'll check the check valves and stuff like that. That's normal.
Well, they said it's equivalency to CVSA level 1.
That's right.
Where you don't get it in a roadside, but it's usually level 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I think that's semantics. I think what they're talking about is they want the motor carrier to do the inspection. They want you to sit there and say that I did a thorough inspection on this vehicle and I'm going to certify that this is equivalent. So, but I'm going to tell you, do I accept it? I'm kind of giving it to it because it's kind of a gray area. But if I were king for the day and the owner of a bus company, I wouldn't do it. I would do my own.
Then you said about the inspector qualifications, like,
Okay, and that's a good question. So, does everyone hear that? So, we're a little bit ahead. Actually, we're going to talk about the 45 days, so we can do it. The 45-day inspection, are there inspector qualifications to that? Really, there's only one state rule that kind of talks about it. It's the brake inspector, right? There's the brake inspector. Other than that, there's no state rule that says that the inspector has to have a certain competence level, okay? However, if, let's say, I go and I'm looking at ABC Bus Company, and I know there's actually a seven, but let's say ABC Bus Company, and I'm looking at, and I'm doing a couple level 5 inspections on the facility, I'm finding some things wrong, and I'm looking at their inspection information, it's showing these were just inspected. Now, we're going to grandfather, we're going to allow state inspections in certain circumstances, but I'm going to go to that inspector or that mechanic, and I'm going to interview them at that point. Because the inspection has to be equivalent to ours. So if the inspector is not doing one, even if he's trying to do it under a state inspection program, we can void that inspection based on the fact that the inspector is incompetent. Now, he may be okay for state, but that does not meet the annual inspection program. Does that make sense? For example, let's say that I go to you and I say, oh, you did this inspection, how you doing? Okay. You know, we've looked at a couple of inspections, we've got some problems. We found some things wrong. I want you to go ahead and show me, demonstrate to me how you do an inspection.
well, I was the last guy, I just got hired 3 days ago, and they told me I had inspections.
Okay.
And
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you demonstrate for me. If I'm really that concerned about it, I'm going to find out. And what's the DOT's job? You guys that have been inspected, that have worked with me, what's our job? Our job is really, if there's things wrong or broken, we want to fix them, right? We want to fix them at this level so that we don't have problems when a big accident happens, and then it's found out by, you know,
plaintiff attorneys.
attorney, but not only that, you get the other people, the other federal people come in and they do a post-accident inspection saying all these things are wrong. So if I go through and then the inspector who's doing a state inspection does not cover all the elements or is incompetent, like for example, I had a guy tell me, I go, how do you check brakes? This is on a truck. But I said, how do you do brake inspection? I mean, I've got all these brakes out of adjustments. How do you? He says, well, I just kind of grab the, slide adjustment, pull on a little bit. I mean, that's how you determine if the brakes are adjustment? Well, as soon as he told me that, the inspector's not qualified. Right? I don't have to get into all this other stuff. If this guy doesn't know how to adjust brakes, that's a major element in the safety of an inspection, right? So, have I done that? Have I gone to inspectors and had them demonstrate to me how they do inspection? I've done it a few times, not too often. If everything looks like it's good, we're going to kind of follow the thing, but if things need to be looked at a little bit more in depth, we will. We'll look at that.
Hey, Pat.
So, yes.
All the companies in here use a specific 45-day inspection form, to their companies. Is there one that you as a DOT desire for the annual? Is there a
Okay,
different one?
there's the elements, Appendix G, right? That's what we're going to sit there and see, because, you know, these companies, vendors, J.J. Keller, all these guys have these ones, okay? But we're going to basically say our inspection has to cover all the elements in Appendix G. And that's pretty intense. I mean, if you look at the 45-day inspection that the CHP requires, you know, again, I lived under that, I did all that for all those years. But it's very generic. What does it say in the vehicle code? It says, you got to check the brakes, you got to check the steering. I mean, just very generic. Only a few items are listed, but it's kind of like our section where it just kind of covers everything, right? It'll cover everything. Appendix G, it specifically talks about almost everything. Lug nuts, you know, everything, right? So we're going to use Appendix G. We're going to follow Appendix G. I like, for the 45-day inspection, we don't mandate that. That's the CHP's thing. I do like the CHP 108 form. That's very comprehensive. The only thing I don't like about that form is that sometimes I think we kind of get into the idea that we'll pencil wet things in a little bit, where we just kind of check all the boxes. And you can see that because some of those things talk about, we referred to this earlier, it has hydraulic brake system, and then they check it as inspected on an air ride bus system, right? I mean, an air bus system, okay? Obviously, somebody's just checking the boxes, right?
My bus, you go up and down, it's got hydraulics.
Yeah, but that's not brakes, right? Okay, but the point is that I like that form. That's a good form. I mean, it's, you know, but you can use anything you want, as long, you know, and you're complying with the state requirement. All we're going to do is look to see if you meet that state requirement. And again, it's pretty, you know, the CHP asks you for a lot, but they're asking you a lot, but the vehicle code is pretty general on what they're looking for. So, I like the 45 days. I like the CHP 108 form. I like it because the CHP 108 form has not only the inspection side, it has the repair side, you know, document, and it also has the maintenance document all together. And if you're taking all your information, which you're not necessarily required to do, and you're putting it in that form, man, I look at that and everything looks in order. I'm gonna progress through that inspection a little quicker than if everything's hidden and there's all these, you know, I mean, it's just gonna be a little bit more work. But I'm not afraid of work. Ask these guys that, I mean, I'm sitting there looking at files for hours, you know. So anyway, yes, sir.
Our DOT inspector wanted our annual inspections, a copy of them in the vehicles. Is that something that is specific to him, or is that something that all DOTs?
No, the requirement is for the annual inspection that it be carried either a sticker or the inspection itself be in the vehicle.
Okay.
And some of you guys that run interstate kind of run into that problem, right? Because I've seen it, right? But here's another problem that comes up. If you're using the CHP 45 days as what we consider to be the equivalent to the annual inspection, a lot of states don't know that, right? They don't know what that is. They don't know that the CHP inspection is equivalent. So sometimes you go in and you might have that inspection, but if it doesn't say annual and it doesn't have all this stuff on it, sometimes that can be a problem. So you might want to put a note on it or whatever that, hey, this is state equivalent. We know it here in California, but a lot of guys don't know it. And it used to be, you might see that more and more, because it used to be, if you had a CVSA valid sticker on there, that was enough, right? When we allowed the roadsides, right? All we would look at is if it had a sticker on it and it was within the year, it was good, right? That's no longer the case. So they might get a little bit more particular in the coming, you know, months and years. So if you're going to use the CHP equivalent, then I would make sure that you keep a copy or something in there that shows that you know that you have that.
It also has to have that the inspector is qualified on it.
Yeah, yes, sir. So this is Pat speaking as an inspector. What I would recommend is that if you've got a guy or a gal that's competent enough to do a good 45-day inspection, get them certified, get the document filled out that they're certified, and then once a year, with the 45-day inspection, do an annual inspection and have it keep the vehicle. You're never going to have a problem. If we nullify an inspection because of whatever, state requirement or where it doesn't meet it or some silliness like that, like I said, you don't want to get a violation of not having an annual inspection. As DOT fines go, that's one of the more expensive ones. So.
You said get them certified. Is there a program that they can?
No. You certify them. They have to be, the motor carrier has to ensure that they are qualified. We have these documents, I'm sure you guys have them. Every time I do a review, I always send them to the people. It's just basically there's a little checklist there. Do they have a year of doing this or whatever, they fill it out. And then you have to have it. Okay? So that would be a good thing. And that's what I would recommend. That way you don't run into the problem if you're running out of state. hey, it's a state equivalent, and they don't understand. If you just have them just fill out the annual inspection once a year, you're good to go. Yeah, so it's up to you guys, but that's something to think about. It's definitely not required, but it may save you some headache in the end.
Arizona, we've got by with our SPAB certificate in there.
The SPAB?
Yeah, said, okay, here's our annual inspection. They're like, okay, for less than a year. So.
That inspector, right? Arizona's pretty hard too, but Arizona's, they're pretty tough.
There's some guys with the total turd, never anything like that service.
Yeah, but that wouldn't put you out of service, but like I said, that could cause you problems. So just something to think about. What else have we got? The 45-day inspection. We are going to hold you to that, right? I mean, we're going to look at it because that's a state mandated regulation, and we're going to look at that. And if you don't meet it, we're going to write it up as not meeting it. Again, is it a critical violation? No. If you're doing inspection, just miss it for a couple of days or whatever, we might say, hey, you're not meeting your 45-day annual inspection, or your 45-day inspection as required by the CHP. Not a big deal as long as you're doing everything, but big deal for CHP, right? So you want to make sure you do it anyway. Okay. And then the 90-day inspection for the emergency exits. If you use the CHP 108, just put a little column in there and just indicate what that is. No inspector requirements on that. Anybody can do that. Okay, so driver can do it. He goes in and checks all the windows, checks all the, makes sure everything's okay, signs it off, it's good to go too. There are no inspection requirements for the emergency exits. Just got to be done every 90 days. Okay? Yes?
Question. So let's say that your vehicle goes down and the vehicle is in the shop for 2 weeks. You just put that on a plan, and you file that the vehicle's out of service for that time, and then when it comes back online, we do the inspection, make sure that it gets done before it goes out.
Yeah, hopefully the federal inspectors are as good as the state inspectors. The state inspectors know that, right? I mean, if it's not in use, it's not in use, right? It sits in your yard, even if it's not out of service, it sits in your yard and you haven't used it. But the violation happens when it goes back in service, right? So they can say it's technically in the yard and it's not in service. So we're going to look for transportation after the 45th day, right? That's what we're looking for, right? So you definitely want, if it's out of service or being repaired, you want to make sure that's done before it gets back on the road.
And then we have to put it in the file that
No, it's going to be up to the...
it's going to be whatever model you're looking at.
Right. Now, if you want to make life easier for your inspector, because anytime you make life easier for the inspector, it's going to go better. I mean, just easier, right? So if you put a note in there, so the inspector, like, I'll be honest with you, I'm looking through that, oh, you missed an interval already, right? So I'm going to put a note on it and keep going. Now, if you put a note in there that basically said, hey, we just, oh, okay. You know what I mean? I'm not even looking at it, generally speaking, right? Now, if I see it a whole bunch, you know, that's pretty good. You get there and vehicles inspect all the time. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to do that, but it would be nice to have it, and then it would help us to know, and then you just kind of go. The cleaner and the more accurate and the more efficient your systems and your records are, the quicker the inspection's going to go. And it starts with the first one. If the first one looks good, you know, I'm just human nature being what it is. They're going to go to the second one. It's going to kind of get a less look, and then you know what I mean. It's just, but if there's still a lot of problems here, just like logbooks. You know, when you stop guys at the scales, and look, you got problems on the logbook. Now they're going to start really looking. You know, what's that? That's right. Yeah. So, very good. Okay, any questions on the inspections and on the maintenance side of it? Okay? I don't think Bill's going to get a chance. DDIRs, I'm almost done. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Bill go on just after this. So DDIR is another big thing that we have a lot of problems. Doesn't seem like a big deal, and there's a lot, right? I mean, I go to some of you guys, man, you guys all these inspections. However you guys want to do it, but sometimes the inspections are in the back of the logs. That can be kind of a problem, right? How many people do that? Does anybody do that when they do the inspection in the back of the log? You know, they have the DVI on the back of the log. A lot of the trucking companies do that. The problem with that is you're required to keep the original for 90 days. So if you're doing it on the back of the log, who has the original? The driver does, right? Because the back of the log is the thing is the carbon copy is the driver's copy, right? So that's really the original of the DVI, right? I don't like that. Plus, I don't like that because they get lost and they're difficult, and you know, you lose a DVIR, you lose too many of those, and that becomes a critical violation. That's one of those serious violations. So you can do it whatever way you want, but what a very efficient system seems to work is to have it. Well, now we're going electronic, so that's going to kind of nice, right? If it's going to be, so that could be the system. But if you're not using that, to have a separate book for each vehicle, right? Because that way the driver goes in, and even if it's not the original, he can look and see if there was no issues on the previous driver. He doesn't have to go find the original, right? Because he can look and see there's no problem. If there's a problem written up, now that driver's got to go find the original and sign it, right? So it makes it nice when it's in the vehicle, but if it's in somebody's logbook somewhere, how are we going to know that, right? Unless it's a triplicate and all these other things that happen. So you guys have been doing this a while. Whatever works for you. I know that sometimes if you have separate from the logs or not in the vehicle, sometimes they get lost and they're difficult. So, and that can be a critical violation. Yes, sir.
There was discussion as far as location. I mean, usually, when the driver starts it, and they put, like I said, I put Campbell, so I put Campbell. Well, our last DOT, there was having some difficulty with that.
Okay, so there is no requirement that you put the location. Okay, so here's one thing I do. Thank you for bringing it, because you did bring some up. I definitely want to bring it up. The initial inspection that a driver does on their bus in the morning, that is required by law, right? They're required to do a pre-trip inspection, called pre-trip. Is that inspection, I'm asking you guys, is that inspection required to be written down anywhere? No, it is not. It is absolutely required. And if anything's found, that driver is not allowed to drive that vehicle. That is absolutely true. The only inspection that's required is the post-trip inspection, the DVIR. Okay? And it has to be written. Okay? Trucking companies, they don't have to do it, but the bus companies still do. Now, what I've seen a lot is drivers will do the DVIR at the beginning of the day, and they don't do one at the post. They said there's nothing wrong. I did it at the beginning of the day. No, if I come to find out that that inspection was written at the beginning, that's not a DVIR. DVIR is a post-accident, excuse me, bad accident, post-day inspection report. Now you can do both, right? Some of those forms you see where they have, pre-trip, they'll check it off, and then there's a post they do it, okay? But the inspection that's required to be done is the post-day inspection. Okay?
There was our trip, when we start off the trip here in Campbell, and went down to Anaheim, Disneyland, he said, well, we should have Anaheim there, not Campbell.
Well, see, but that's not one of the requirements on that form, right? The form just requires that the driver fill out and send the vehicle. So for you guys internally, it would be where they did. It would be Anaheim, because that's if we want. It's not required, but if you're filling out the form correctly, I guess it would be Anaheim, because that's when it was done, right? That's when it was done in Anaheim at the end of the day, right? Does that make sense? But there's no requirement for that to be on the form. So, unless you want it, but that's up to you.
But speaking as a driver, as a
Yeah.
speaking as a person. So now we can, instead of donating, put where the initial and then the slash.
You can do that. Yeah, you can do that.
I've definitely seen DVIR application be used as correct evidence to go along with driver logs.
And it could. Yeah, it definitely, and same thing with like times.
Corroborate times,
Yeah.
corroborate locations.
What was the question?
Yeah, we didn't hear that.
I'm sorry. So he's talking about sometimes that location might be used as an investigator to kind of prove that somebody was at a certain point or whatever. And that's true. I mean, if I'm looking at a log and he didn't say he was in Anaheim and that DVIR says he was in Anaheim, I'm gonna be talking to a driver. I'm gonna be like, what happened here? Right? So we're gonna use all the evidence and all the information that's there to get the whole picture. That's true. Some people say, well, just put what's necessary, man. I'm causing more problems for yourself. It's up to you. That's not a requirement as far as the regulation. So we're not going to get excited about it one way or the other. But if it seems to be inconsistent with the other information that's there, then maybe grounds for further investigation. And sometimes that happens. Okay? All right.
You say investigation?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
We call that now. It used to be inspection. Now it's called an investigation. So safety investigation or whatever. Okay, this is to answer your question earlier. You're talking about how many, this is a fleet size, this is how many we're going to look at, how many buses we're going to actually physically do the inspection. So, I don't know if some of you guys have a lot of buses, and some of you ladies have a lot of buses, but understand that we got to get this threshold. So if you have buses that are in, and guys try to say this, or gals say this, oh, they're in Yellowstone. We've got, the other two buses are in Yellowstone. Really? So we call our Yellowstone division, and they're gonna go over there and gonna inspect that bus, right? They want us to inspect these buses. So if you don't want us to go looking at the one in Yellowstone, you might want to get the other buses or whatever. They're gonna do it. okay? So this is the number we're looking at. When we first started, I'll be honest with you, when we first started, it was ugly. People have gotten used to us now, and they're getting ready for us. Like when I call you a week in advance, man, mechanics get on those vehicles right now, right? So they're kind of getting used to us, and that's kind of a good thing. But I don't know, in the future, maybe it might come to a point where those inspections don't necessarily have to be done as part of the actual inspection. They can be done outside of those dates, and we've done that. Where if we're anticipating going somewhere in a week from now, do the inspections a week before, just drop in unannounced. Can the DOT come in, drop in unannounced, and say, I want to look at those vehicles? Yeah, we can do that. And if there's reason to believe that there's shenanigans going on, we might do something like that. Who knows? But the point is that we're going to look at those vehicles. Okay. The other thing you don't want to do, or don't give because this has happened in the past where we're talking to people and it's like, well, where are all your other buses at? And the paperwork's saying the dispatch record showing there's only 3 buses on the road. You guys got 20, and there's only 5 here. Where are the other ones? There's a yard down the street. It's like, and they go over there, because people are staging for it. I understand that. So just be aware of that we're going to find, we're going to investigate to find out where the buses are. Not that, that happens all the time, because it doesn't happen all the time. But it does happen, okay? Or people say, I don't want you to look at that vehicle. Well, really? Because, we'd rather see, and some of the companies have actually, and here's something to think about, because I'll be honest with you, I've seen both sides of the spectrum here as far as companies. And I've been with the Highway Patrol, and I've been doing this over 35 years. I'll tell you what, there's some companies, some bus companies especially. I've never seen a truck company, because we're not really looking at truck companies, the good ones. We look at good bus companies, right? Because we look at all bus companies, right? We don't generally look at good truck companies. That's not what we do, okay? And I'll tell you what, I've been very, very impressed with some of the companies out there. Very impressed. I mean, just impeccable with what they want to do for safety. I go there and I recommend it. I say, hey, you know what? There's a couple of buses that are coming in. You got any buses that are going to come in later on today? I'd like to do a level 1 on the inspections when the guys come back in. Absolutely. We'll let you know when they're coming in. We're not going to tell the drivers when they come in. So the driver comes in, we look at it, and his log's not filled out, right? He's just doing local stuff, but he's required to do a log because the company requires it. Well, he was going to fill it out when he got back. Was it a serious violation of the company? No. But this company got to be aware that the drivers were doing it, right? But I mean, it's just impressive that when you see a company whose attitude is that they want to do right, if there's something wrong, we want to know about it, right? So what? If we have a problem, if we get rid of for a violation, okay, we'll fix it, we'll make it better. That's what we want to do, right? I'll tell you, they're impressed. And they get the other side, man. They fight you on everything, right? I don't get that here. You guys are here because you guys want to learn how to do right and do right. So kudos to you guys. I'm just telling you, the bus industry, I've met some people and some companies just outstanding. And that's a good thing for you guys. That's really a lot of credit to you guys. So,
The other ones you can't find.
yes, sir.
You're saying that you do all of the bus companies. How well is that working in California?
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
We got a little bit behind because we have 2 priorities as far as the FMCSA. We have what we call these high-risk carriers, which are normally they're not bus companies, they're normally trucking companies. And those are a priority for us, that we have to go out and see them within, what's it, Bill, 90 days? We got to go see them and inspect them within 90 days. The other priority we have is that by mandate, we talk about the law, says that we got to look at all the bus companies, give them a rating within 3 years, right? So we got a little bit behind, and some of you guys may have seen in the last, last year, we brought in inspectors from out of state, from Wyoming, Texas, and stuff to help us because we had to catch up. And we're pretty much done now. We pretty much got everybody done, and now we're kind of going through the second wave. We're going to see this. We're going to see people for the second time now. And generally speaking, what you can absolutely expect to happen is it's a 3-year interval. So we're going to see between the second and the 3rd year is likely when it's going to happen. Does that make sense? Because you got to do it every 3 years. So sometime in that 3rd year, unless there's an accident or you get some scores that are high, and then we're going to probably come in a little earlier. Okay. All right, Bill's really steady in here. I think Bill's getting ready to give you the razzle-dazzle stuff. stuff here. Let's see, and here it is. Oh, this is me. Still talking about that. All right, here we go. This is Bill Poole. He started the agency when I was 2. And I'm old. I'm kidding. Here you go.
How many of you, for the most part, your vehicles seldom go outside the sovereign state of California? Raise your hands. Very infrequently does your bus go into Nevada, Oregon, Arizona. So all the rest of you have vehicles that a half a dozen or more times a year go out of California, physically out of California with passengers on it and come back. Well, then the first thing, the exceptions probably are not going to apply to you. There's probably no sweet spot, no wiggle room that you probably are ultimately are going to have ELDs or the automatic onboard recording devices, or you're going to have to make a substantial political contribution. Apparently, as we came in today, on our phone, it had 3 sensitive, controversial news bulletins about ELDs. One is it's going to drive retail prices up significantly. 2, yes, sir. Yes, sir. 2, that it is going to switch the freight from small carriers, small passenger carriers, small trucking companies to large ones. Okay. And that 30 senators and congressmen, and can you guess which side of the house they're on, are right now requesting a stay or postponement or some further waiver, variance, or exception. So what we're saying may not come to pass, but we're told to gear up as investigators, okay, to start issuing tickets effective April 1st, equivalent fines, violations that would affect your safety rating. Okay. And one of those requests for a stay says, why don't we do this? Like uncontrolled, why don't we just take the people that have unsatisfactory ratings and accidents and poor compliance, and why don't we inflict this on them first? And those that have few accidents, satisfactory ratings, etc., why don't we spare them for now? And that angle is being sold right now in Washington, D.C., under the present administration. But how many of you right now don't have an onboard recording device or an ELD that's installed and functioning? Don't tell me who you are, just raise your hand anonymously. All of you have a recording device or an ELD that's functioning and ready to go April the 1st, and we will be able to use one of the means of transferring it to us. Okay. That really kind of concludes our presentation. Most of the exemptions you would never qualify for because of what you said a few minutes ago. In California, you're unlikely to use vehicles that are older than 2000. You're unlikely to stay within 100 nautical air miles, or your Class C limousines under 150 if you go out of the state of California. And there's not one person in here that vehicles seldom, infrequently go to air, rail, or water ports or beyond California. Oh my gosh.
Wait, try that one again?
There's not one company in here where when their drivers are dispatched, they stay away from air, rail, water ports, and geographical borders. That you claim to be California only intrastate as opposed to interstate. Okay? Well, you guys have done it already. You've got functioning onboard recording devices that will give you about a 2-year until California, and then you've got functioning ELDs that infrequently malfunction, and you are ready to
Fully functional or functional?
Pardon?
Fully functional or functional? I'm still working on some of the bugs.
Infrequently functional.
But it's less than 8, he only has 8 days a month, so we don't have to do it.
The things I would remind, go ahead.
Can you make the distinction between AOBRD? Can you make the distinction between AOBRD and ELD?
Yeah, the two main functions is, the one gives you 2 additional years to install a genuine ELD from the manufacturer. The other one is, the ELD is more connected, either physically connected or electronically connected, okay, with the engine components. Most onboard automatic recording devices don't have the 12 engine components that they have a more finite and specificity of meeting the things on page. Do you have page 3 of the new page 3? And while you're finding page 3, on this slide, the most important thing to write down, if you fall asleep during my presentation, is to be able to verify that the one you have stays on that list, because the manufacturers have no compelling reason, there's no prohibition requiring them to notify you if we take them off that list. Okay? So I would periodically check that to make sure that your manufacturer and the model remains on the list. That's why I would have, that would be something you want the boss of your company to have someone do periodically. Okay, go right ahead. You see the list of, I believe it's page, you don't have page 3? Looking down, just for a second, looking down on page 3 of the handout. I'm sorry, it's page 4 of the handout. Forgive me. Look down at the 5th one from the top, 5th one down. And I'm going to ask someone who's really knowledgeable to read that and tell me what you think it means. The ELD time is synchronized with the UTC coordinating universal time.
Don't know.
And you know something? I don't have a good I know on it. Okay. But these are some of the differences. These are some of the differences between automatic onboard recording device and the ELD. No, they in fact indirectly can meet some of the requirements, but they don't have to meet the full measure of requirements that the ELD has. So,
Greenwich Mean Time.
Pardon?
The Greenwich Mean Time, universal clock.
I'm not going to. I'm going to ask the boss. Do you know what that is?
I didn't hear.
Number 5. This is the highlight. That is the distinguishing, differentiating characteristic between the onboard recording device and there's research here.
I mean, I imagine it has to be that they have to be synchronized. So one of the questions that came up, and it's, I think that, what is the difference between, well, a lot of you, if you installed your ELD before the date it was required to be installed, okay, how many people did that? How many people did it? Okay, if you did it before, then technically, for 2 years, those could be considered AOBRs. Okay, because we're using really, the date that it was the December 18th, that day and after, if you install it, they have to be ELDs. Now, what does that mean to you? It doesn't mean anything really. Well, okay.
Unless you don't have it, then it means a
Yes.
lot.
No, the good news is that there's an interpretation that says that in good faith, you purchased what was represented as an ELD, and for some reason, it doesn't meet all the specific specifications of the ELD, but you installed it before the 18th of December, midnight, you can claim it to be a
No, AOB.
On board.
AOB.
ongoing recording device. And so you have to be able to explain that to the officer who is looking at your instructions. So how will the officer know that you're going, what you have? He's going to ask you to produce, the driver produce on the roadside, either a hard copy of instructions or an electronic version of the instructions that he can see. He's also going to ask, can you let me look at something from outside of the door? Can I just peek in and look at something? Do you have it on a phone? Do you have it on an iPad? Do you have it on a screen? Okay, that's going to be a very important requirement. Okay, and then if by chance the hunger pains now exceed my attention, grabbing presentation, but write down the second website, and and when you get back to the office, you got a little time, look at that second website, and that will give you some additional inputs. I want to digress just a minute, and I will try to be through in 2 minutes. What is the major difference other than 10, 15 hours between you and the trucking industry? What is really the major core difference that you guys fought for and that you really want to preserve? Between, they are 11, 14, you're 10 and 15. What is the real major difference?
Our freight.
Huh?
Our freight.
Exactly, but they, when they come on board, they have lapsed time. Unless they take 8 hours or sleep over 8 hours or greater, when they come on at 14 hours, they're not supposed to be driving off of private property. That's the big difference. And you guys, when I go in and look at yours, the driver has an itinerary or a schedule that gives him the discretionary latitude of going off duty as the passenger needs necessity, if he is relieved of the responsibility for the passengers in the bus. So it's not uncommon to see bus drivers still working after a lot more than 14 hours and a lot more than 15 lapse hours. Okay.
There's not 16 consecutive.
For the staff, school buses staff.
For the school, for the staff, but for the tours, I've seen them a lot more than 15 hours. And it's because they have that liberal discretion of not running time. When those 14 hours are up, the truck driver is fair game, but he's got a target on his spot. How about the next
And
one?
the 34-hour restart.
Yes, sir. Well, that concludes my presentation. We'll ask.
Question, Matt?
One of the past conferences I was in, you were talking about notification if the system goes out of compliance. It was suggested that the operator put in writing when they sign a contract with a vendor that they notify them if they're not in compliance. And have them sign it, put it in bold, and put it out in the contract, since you don't require it. Put it in the contract when you sign with them.
I think that's an excellent idea.
So that's what came up in a past conference where that issue came up, writing in the contract when you sign the deal.
Likewise, when the device doesn't function properly, the driver within 24 hours is supposed to notify the company. And ideally in writing, an email, or something that we can always, and the company has how many days to repair it? 8. And after that, they've got to notify, ask for an extension if they're going to continue to operate, and the driver reverts to paper hours.
So if I run a shuttle company and don't do interstate work, do I have to put an ELD in?
No, not for 2 years, not for 2 years. When the state mandates it, you might have to put it in. And isn't that 20?
It's not done yet.
And it's at 100 air miles. Let's say I just run just shuttles.
Well, likewise, if you have several drivers and you could allocate the drivers to 8-day periods of consecutive interstate, and on each side of those 8 consecutive days interstate, you could provide 11 days intrastate or operating a vehicle not subject or another activity to compensate them, then you wouldn't have to do it either. But I think that's going to be too complex of a logistical dispatch matter for you to achieve any efficacious profitability.
So is that 8 consecutive or 8 out of 30?
Any 8 days. So it could be.
Okay, so 8 out of 30.
But some people could make it to the East Coast and back in 8 days. Okay, especially if they have a sleeper berth and a co-driver. They could very easily do that. And then do something in the state of California, exclusively in California, or exclusively within the 100 nautical air miles, or then switch to a vehicle that's a Class C, a limo, a van, or some other activity. And then they could save all that overhead, I guess. But I think in the long run, this is going to function. Okay, this is very politically sensitive. I think this is going to function both to increase safety by eliminating those that are operating on shoestrings. Because this is not only expensive to install it, you have a much and while you still can falsify, quote, your logs, because it doesn't fully address the off-duty time, the time the engine isn't turned on, the activities where they're loading, unloading, doing all kinds of non-driving related duties. It is such an improvement that large numbers of trucking companies are literally going out of business because it just reveals what they're doing while that vehicle is moving. And it counts for that time.
So mechanic-wise, if you just takes it around the yard or something on the ELD, how is that?
The mechanics and all personnel that operate the vehicle, such as the drivers that are transporting it, transporting for repairs or transporting it to turn it in or purchase, those are going to be allocated an account so they can log in also. Or those can be annotated edits that explain who did it. Okay, that's going to be a requirement, and a driver is not to have two accounts for the ELD. One account when he's in California only, and another account when he is driving on the road. And we've already discovered that some people are issuing 2 accounts so they can log in. He can log in as Smith one day and Jones the next day. He can be his own co-driver. Okay. So.
Yes, sir.
What's the question again?
Do we have to have passenger counts in the manifest data as part of the ELD paperwork?
No, it goes back to the basic requirements. What do you have to have? You have to have either a BL number, BOL number, or who the shipper is in the commodity. So number, no, you'd have to say, let's say it's ABC, whatever, and then there's the passengers.
Your charter operators over here.
But your charter orders and stuff will have that. That's another thing that traditional people are not maintaining is the PUC and those required documents. And those are required supporting documents.
So the documentation requirements are probably going to be as difficult to master as the ELD for some, because now we're going to be asking about why there's the times were cut off the fuel receipts, why there's no times on itineraries, why there's no locations, and if there's more than 8 documents that are retained, the first and last document of each 24-hour period must be.
So there are some issues with that. For example, traditionally, the big fuel companies that run in the United States have not put times on their documents, right? And that was because drivers didn't want the times, right? Because if Petro put the time on it, then they'd go to Flying J, because Flying J didn't have it, right? Because they didn't want to be shown with the word. Now the requirement is that the time be on there in the local time. So for example, if you're in Mississippi and you get fuel there, the time has to go on that document. And it has to be the local time in Mississippi.
In the city and state,
City and state stuff. So,
driver identification.
yeah, a lot of those things, you know, and sometimes people give us a box of receipts and all these things that nobody's name, toll, and all sorts of stuff. And some of the stuff is not required. For example, like a toll document. Do we need toll documents anymore? It became useless, right? Because if we know where you are, what do we care what the toll is, right? But fuel is still going to be one that's going to determine status, right? Fuel, if they're fueling, what status is that? On duty, not driving, right? So that document determines status. So does bills of lading, right? Things like that. Those are still going to be required. The other thing that Bill was talking about, that some of the companies are going to try to make it so that they don't have to have an ELD. That's going to be very, very difficult. And for you guys, it's not what you're going to do, right? I mean, you know, we talk about, you know, if you go on an interstate run and then you come back, you're still on interstate rules, what, for 7 days, right? So it's just better just to get on, get the ELDs and get done with it and be on with it. So work through the difficulties. We're being very, what's the word? You know, we're not being really hard on because there's a transition period of getting used to it, and we understand that, okay? But as an industry, I think it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be safer. People are going to be safer all the way around. So, any more questions?
Having an ELD on board, you mentioned you got to have instructions how to operate it. What else is required to be on the vehicle for an ELD?
7 blank manual logs, 7 of the, yes, in case there's a malfunction.
Okay, so instructions, logbook, anything else?
And some means to indicate what the manufacturer is, the model, the make, the serial number, and things of that nature. And again, when you're trying to differentiate if yours is an ELD or an automatic onboard recording device, the ELD must be intricately synchronized with the engine of the commercial motor vehicle CMV. Engine synchronization means monitoring engine operation to automatically capture the engine power status, vehicle motion status, miles driven, engine hours, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay. And onboard recording devices don't necessarily do that.
But they are integrated, right? Let me just clarify that. Onboard recording devices are integrated into the engine. They don't have to have all of the things the ELD is, because the ELD has more things, but they absolutely have to be integrated into the engine just like the other one. It's just so that there's some differences. That's why the rule is right now that if you installed an ELD before the date that it was required, you can technically call that an AOBR. Don't worry about that. Basically, you guys are just trying to comply with what's going on, and we'll figure it out. So a good thing might be, so that you guys mechanics and you're looking for compliance, what I would think is maybe get a folder, and in that folder have a blank log that's in that folder, the instructions in that folder, and maybe a sticker on the front that has the ELD information and all that. So if someone asks, here it is, officer, I've got it all right here. Officer looks at it, boom, puts it away. If for some reason it goes down and they have to use those manual logs, then mechanics, you guys put a brand new one and put a new folder in there and move on. That way you'll never have a problem, because I'll tell you what, ELDs for the enforcement folks is a little bit confusing for them, right? So they're looking for the easy one, right? What's easier than saying, do you have blank logs? No, I don't have any. Okay, it's just a violation, right? Not that cops do that, but I'm just saying that could happen. So instruct, stay there with the instructions, because sometimes those get lost. Over here. Oh, sorry, over here.
I had a question. Let's say that we have a bus and it's taken in for repair. And the place that it's repairing it, they have to go out and drive the bus. How do we justify for the miles that are being put on that bus?
Again, as Bill pointed out, the engine is going to keep track of those miles. And what's going to happen is when I come to do an audit, I'm going to look and I'm going to see those miles come up. Now, as Bill pointed out, mechanics should have a login. So if a mechanic goes and he or she is going to go take that on a loop, they're going to log in and they're going to go take this loop or whatever. Or if they're accepted and you don't want to do that, then just be aware that that person, you have to build a log that who did it, who actually took
Yeah,
that
at the dealer or someone else, a commercial stuff, then you have to identify those unassigned miles, okay? You have to identify, and that's going to be the big one. Okay? Unassigned miles, and those of you who are so affluent, you let the drivers take the buses home and use them for personal conveyance. That's going to have to be logged as off-use.
Yeah, and you should really have a policy that. Several of the companies that I actually dealt with, we talked about that you need to have a personal conveyance policy. Now, the DOT right now is, they did a notice, they sent the notice out, they're trying to get some information, they're going to come up with a more solidified rule on that. But in the interim, you want to know if your driver is not allowed to take that bus and go down and get a beer, go down and get a root beer, then you don't want to do it. You want to have a policy that says that. We talked about that. A couple of the board conscious companies, we talked about it. I said, think about it. What is the liability that your driver taking that and going across town to a movie? Wouldn't it be cheaper to give them a suspense to go use Uber than to have your bus out there being exposed to liability? Right? Wouldn't it be cheaper just to do Uber? Say, no, you're going to leave that bus at the thing and you're going to use Uber. But that's up to you guys. You can use personal conveyance. But as far as liability, is that something you really want? Because we're going to look at it and we're going to see those miles and unassigned miles or whatever, or personal conveyance miles, we're going to see that.
There's no Uber in Bryce Canyon.
No Uber in Bryce Canyon. There you go.
There's no
Put a bike on the
Uber in
back.
Eugene, Oregon.
But Bryce Canyon or whatever, but it's still a hotel, right? Whatever, right? So the point is you guys got to think about some of those things. And you are responsible to manage your drivers, right? So ultimately, if your driver's out there driving your bus on off-duty time and something happens, you guys are ultimately, well, not you guys are the mechanics. But, so I'm thinking I should have transitioned. Go ahead.
My half-brother, real quick question.
Yes,
What about a TDIR if your ELD is malfunctioning? Do you need to keep a record or have extra paper for that?
If the ELD is going to, if that's what you normally use and it's not functioning, then you definitely need to have it. You absolutely have to have a DDIR. That's a good question.
I have a question for you. So you're talking about unassigned log events. You use an outside service that the mechanic does not have a login.
Yeah, again, the login is not necessarily, employees have to have a login. You just have to be able to explain what that was, right? So, yeah.
6,000.
That's a lot. You got to explain, because we're going to look at it. You know, the issue really comes in, really, is not really what's happening here locally. It's really on the road, and all of a sudden, wow, I'll give you an example. And this is the difference between an AOBR and an ELD. The old AOD, I used to work at, I worked at Creative, but Chowchilla, and a guy would come in and look at his log, and he's on an AOBR, and we look at it and says, oh, he's been off duty for the last 24 hours, and he says he's just now coming from Fresno. Well, nothing there, right? And I had no way to check it. That's the old AOBRs, right? Now, under the new ELD, it's going to tell me how many miles that vehicle drove that day. So that guy comes in and says, I just came from Fresno. Well, really? Because it says you have 500 miles for that. So if you were in Fresno for the last 24 hours, how did you get 500 miles? So that's one of the differences in the ELD. It's going to actually tell the inspector roadside how many miles. Even though they may not be assigned to that driver, it'll tell you on the vehicle how many miles were done on that vehicle that day. So the guys that are turning it off and doing it, that nonsense isn't going to be happening. Because as soon as you turn that baby back on, it knows the odometer and it knows how many miles that it's been driving. And it's going to put it, so the inspector roadside is going to look at and see that. So that's some of the things that are a little bit different. I mean, semantically, what it means is if you did it before the date, you can call it an AOBR, but it's going to function as an ELD because it is an ELD, right? And that's what it is, right? But there's some reasons why that I don't think anyone here would really worry about it, but there is some technical reasons why, you know, if you're a renegade company or something, you might want to call it an AOPR or something. But it's just some different reasons. But both of those still record where the vehicle is, and when we do compliance reviews, it tells us all the information about that. It's just roadside is a little bit more difficult, AOPR versus ELD.
How many of you are considered a small business administration, small carriers by definition of less than $1 million revenue and less than 12 employees in your company?
Million, less than
You might want to follow what's going on in Congress right now because these 30 congressmen and senators are asking for additional postponement, exemptions, and waivers.
So, an important thing that I want to make a little bit of clarification what Bill said earlier. There's a lot going on right now politically around this issue, but everybody understands that there is no exception. If you don't have an exception, you have to have an ELD right now. Okay, so the point I'm making is that a lot of the smaller trucking companies and stuff like that were kind of hoping because of their association that they weren't going to have to do it, and then when the day came, it was kind of bad. They still have to have it, so when we go, they don't have it, we're writing them up for not having it, that type of thing. So if we get an exception a little bit later, you know, like so say Congress says, okay, we're going to give you guys 2 more years, well then at that point, you guys are going to get 2 years, but don't bank on that happening because more that's just going to create problems for you later, right? And I don't think anybody here, you guys are here because you want to be on top of what's going on, you want to learn what's going on and be on the top as opposed to just being behind it. And so, keep up. Any other questions? I know you guys are.
Well, I hate to be the
bearer of bad news.
bearer of bad news, but we got to cut this off. We got to keep